Well, welcome back, everybody. Welcome back to the Dark Roast Cult Podcast, where we drink coffee and talk about death and other fun stuff. I don't know what brought you back, be it curiosity or maybe you just enjoyed the show. Either way, I'm glad you're here. Today is already off to a great start. Not only am I starting this podcast at 1:30 at night to avoid all the sound and all the ambience of many cars driving by the front of my house. Today I went to Starbucks. I got a free coffee. I don't know if you've ever gotten a free coffee before, but it's like winning the lottery that you didn't even know you were playing, but also you get a coffee. I didn't even have to buy anything. Their computing machine froze up while they were calculating the price of my order, so they just gave it to me for free. How could you complain about that? After recording last week's podcast, I took a trip to the beach. For those of you who are unable to get to the beach or you just don't have a beach near you, I recorded a little bit of beach sound so you can enjoy the beach too. Take a listen. There's nothing more relaxing than the sound of waves crashing on the beach, am I right? Well, that and maybe having your bills paid on time. Anyway, I've got some news for you. To avoid jail time over vehicle theft charges, a New Jersey man tried to fake his own death by photoshopping his own death certificate. And he would have got away with it too, if it hadn't have been for those meddling typos and font sizes. Upon further investigation, authorities discovered many typos on the document, including one right in the name of the department from which the document would have been coming from. Don't you just hate that Photoshop doesn't have a spell check feature? If it was that easy to get away with photoshopping your death certificate, don't you think more people would have been doing it by now? Could you imagine the amount of things people would have faked their own death to get out of if only it were that simple? Personally, I could think of a few things that I would rather have avoided by telling people I was dead. And in Louisiana, a man is being charged with criminal damages after a video of him went live on the internet swimming in a giant fish tank inside the Bass Pro Shop store. Kevin Wise, or Kevin Not So Wise, as I'd like to call him, and probably will call him for the rest of his life. Not that I know the man. Dove into the tank at the Bass Pro Shop in search of TikTok fame, but instead lost his job and caught a charge. So, I just think about it next time. If you think that you're about to do something awesome, just think, is it gonna ruin a Bass Pro Shop? Because if the answer is yes, it might be worth it. It might, it might not. And finally, in the UK, a 19-year-old man held up a fast food joint with a knife. Matthew Hawkins, a Wales resident, Hawkins and a friend were playing an online video game. During the game, Hawkins became aggressive when a disagreement broke out, threatening his friend to come to his house with a knife and beat him up. Instead, he showed up drunk out of his mind at a pizza restaurant with a knife, indicating that he would like free chips. "I want free chips. Hurry up or I'm gonna cut you," is what he said. After 15 minutes of terrifying the staff, he then moved on to a convenience store down the street where he was apprehended by armed police. Although I do understand the need for fried potatoes while you're intoxicated, I feel like going about it this way is probably the worst way. In fact, I think a please and thank you will get you 100 more potatoes than a stabbing motion with a knife. You can feel free to quote me on that, too, by the way. I'm just trying to bring the world together, one potato at a time. While you might consider a lot of the things that I talk about on this podcast questionable or even fake for sure, I promise you, this actually happened. In the eastern Pacific Ocean sits 6 square kilometers of land, covered in unrelenting and what some would describe as bloodthirsty crabs. Clipperton Island is an isolated small ring of land surrounding a lagoon off the coast of Central America. The island is littered with shipwrecks as it's surrounded by reefs and crashing waves, which makes it next to impossible to visit, and next to impossible to leave. First discovered by the French in 1711 and named the Island of Passion, obviously for its abundance of guano. Later, I guess the name was changed to Clipperton Island for the English pirate John Clipperton, who may or may not have used it as a base in the 18th century. Guano was later discovered to be the island's main natural resource and was soon claimed to be a part of America. Its ownership bounced around between Mexico, France, and America, ending up co-owned by Mexico and France. I guess America got the chocolatey end of the popsicle stick. In 1893, a San Francisco mining company declared that there was millions of dollars in guano on the island, and brought 100 Chinese and Italian miners, as well as their families, to build a small settlement on the island. The settlement included a small railway, lighthouse, and housing for its new residents. The Mexican government also sent out officials to oversee the operation. And in 1906, when the guano just wasn't what they thought it would be, the British Pacific Island Company bought out the mining operation. At this point, I'd like to make sure that you understand that guano is just dried bird feces. It's used as fertilizer and was an ingredient in gunpowder. These people were here to shovel bird crap in mass amounts. 2 years ago, I was out at the lake when I found what I thought to be some kind of shark's tooth, which would be pretty upsetting because sharks shouldn't be at the beach. It's a lake. Anyway, I took to the internet to see what people thought it might be, and it turned out an overwhelming amount of you told me what you thought I had was bird crap that had hardened. I got mad and I threw it away. My point is, clearly whatever I had, whatever it was, had some value. I told this story to humanize me. I'm humble. At least humble enough to admit that I had put suspect feces in my pocket and carried it back to the car with me. I included a picture of it on the Instagram, just so you can see how shark's tooth-like it was, and that I'm not an insane person that picks up bird feces and puts it in my pocket for no reason. Anyway. By 1910, the Mexican Revolution was well underway, and the good guano deposits had been tapped out, so most of the miners left the island. Most. Because of the outbreak of conflict, the ships that would drop off supplies for the colony every 2 months suddenly stopped. The islanders had no idea, but both supply boats had been sunk in combat, leaving the island's rations on the floor of the ocean, and everybody on the island to fend for themselves. This meant a menu of seafood, land crab, island birds, bird eggs, and coconuts. Although the coconut groves yielded 3 coconuts every 6 months per tree, that wasn't enough vitamin C for the entire island. And because of that, coconuts were only given to the women and children, and slowly the men died of scurvy. In 1914, an American Navy ship ran ground on the beach. When they saw how life was on the island, they left to get help immediately, and when Mexico denied help for the island, the Navy stepped in. Returning to rescue the inhabitants, they were turned away by the governor of Clipperton, who denied rescue until Mexico gave the official notice to vacate the island. At that time, 6 kids, 6 women, and 15 men remained on the island. Little did they know, the next boat to try and help them would be 3 years away from stopping in. On May 5th, 1915, a boat passed by, but took no notice of the island. All but one of the men who had not succumbed to scurvy loaded up into a small boat and attempted to sail out and catch up with the ship as it was passing by. But, to the horror of the governor's wife, who was watching through a telescope, the small boat was thrown around by the harsh waves and capsized in the surf. All of the men on board, including the governor, died in the water. The one man who stayed behind on Clipperton Island was named Alvarez, and he was the lighthouse keeper. Soon after becoming the only man on the island, Alvarez gathered all of the guns and named himself king of the island. He started new laws that made everybody on the island his property and would demand service from the women, attacking and killing those who oppose him. He declared that no one would leave the island alive. 2 years into Alvarez's reign of terror, and he had made the decision, he demanded that the governor's widow be the next woman who lived with him in his hut. And that is when a plan was set into motion. On the morning of July 18th, 1917, they took their chance. Lady Arnold, the governor's widow, her 6-year-old son, and fellow islander Tirzah Rendon arrived at Alvarez's hut while he was sitting on the porch. Tirzah walked in the entrance to find a hammer she had hid the day before. Lady Arnold waited outside as a distraction. When the timing was just right, when Alvarez seemed the most unsuspecting, that's when the widow gave the signal. Tirzah jumped into action, striking the tyrant twice in the head with the mallet, which was enough to send him to the ground. But, just like any horror movie cliché, just when they thought they were safe, he was back on his feet with an axe. He swung for Lady Arnaud. She grabbed onto him and held on for dear life, attempting to wrestle the axe out of his hands. During the confrontation, she yelled to her 6-year-old son to grab the rifle and run. As they wrestled, it said that Tirzah helped finish the job off with the hammer, but no one really knows how it played out. After they were sure Alvarez was dead, they went looking for gasoline to burn his body, and that's when they saw a ship on the horizon who had come searching small islands for Nazis who had been hiding out after the war. They rescued the remaining 11 children and women. When they got to shore, they found that most people had assumed that they were all dead, and the governor died when his small boat was attacked by a sea monster. All that remains on the island today, apart from the birds and the hordes of orange crab that will attempt to eat anything that stops moving, are the rusted out remains of what was Mexico's forgotten murder colony. Right off the top, I'd like to give a shout out to Chris, who sent an email to the podcast regarding our last episode. The email reads, "As far as the Mayan calendar being wrong about the end of the world, what if COVID-19 was supposed to be our extinction event, but medicine and hygiene have become so advanced that we just kind of shrugged it off?" Chris, when I read the article about the Mayan calendar being wrong and it actually being this year, that was the first thought that popped into my head. With the news articles that keep coming out every month with just like things being worse and worse, like we had the murder hornets the one month. I think there was another month where there was a locust swarm. These are all very, very concerning things when they all happen together on their own. They don't seem like such a big deal, but together, it's a little worrying. I won't lie. Personally, for me, I don't like thinking about the end of the world. I don't like talking about the end of the world. I've had it up to here with all these doomsday prophecies and end of the world movies. It is a severe bummer for me. Anyway, I don't know. What do you think? Send me an email, darkroastcultpodcast@gmail.com. Send me your thoughts on the show, anything we talked about, anything you want me to talk about. Send it in an email. I'll read it right here on the show. It'll be a good time, I promise. So, last podcast I ended by telling you guys that we're planning on releasing our own coffee. It's been an ongoing project of mine for like 6 to 7 months now. I've been trying to get this coffee off the ground. Back in December, January, I went ahead and I was drop shipping coffee. You may remember I had a small run of coffee on my website. I didn't like the method of selling it and shipping it. There was a roaster in California who was producing the coffee, but I wasn't getting to sample it or know if it was good. I didn't have any of the answers to the questions people were asking about it. So obviously that method wasn't working. So I sent out a few emails, I made some phone calls, I got in touch with a local roaster who allowed me to make my own blend of coffee. He sent me home with different beans. I got to sit there like a weird coffee scientist and put all these beans together, see how they taste. I came up with a blend that I think is really good. It's a dark roast, going with the theme, sticking with the brand. It's a dark roast coffee. It's really good. It's really, earthy, really chocolatey. It's kind of all of the things I look for in a coffee. So I had most of this set up and ready to go right about the time COVID hit. And I made the decision to myself that, hey, you know what, maybe during a global pandemic, epidemic, maybe people aren't as worried about getting coffee through the mail as I think they are. I guess what I'm really trying to say is that the time is starting to feel like it might be right. Not to worry though, stay tuned to the podcast and I'll keep you guys up to date with all things coffee coming in the future, including our first release of our very first blend of coffee, called Morning Coffee. We're spelling it the other way. And by the way, when I say we, I mean me. I'm alone here, but I like to say the royal we. Like I feel like I'm including all of you guys when I say that. I don't know what it is about coffee, but since having my first sip, I think I realized that my entire life is a lie. Well, not my entire life, just the part of my life where I thought that I didn't like coffee. If you might be a tea drinker listening to this probably is just going straight over your head, but you know what, tea people are okay with me too. I don't know what it is about coffee, but since my first sip, I think I realized that my entire life was a lie. Well, not my entire life, just the part of my life where I thought that I didn't like coffee because it turns out coffee's really good and it makes me feel good and it tastes really good. But, that's just me. You may be a tea drinker listening to all this. It's probably going straight over your head, but that's fine. Tea drinkers are okay with me. Personally, I'm a coffee man. I tried tea. I tried to go to the tea side, but I just always come back to what I know. And what I know is hot brown bean water. Although, personally, when I make my bean water, I always throw ice in there because I want it to be cold enough that I can just get it right in my body and not have to wait. Is that normal? Is that a normal want or need? I can't think of anything else that I am that impatient with. Is that a word? Impatient? I'm that impatient with. Coffee. As soon as it's done, if it's not in my body, we've got a problem. I don't know why I'm telling you all this. I just want to be able to share coffee with my friends. And if you're listening to this, you may not know it yet, but you're my friend. We're gonna be best friends, and we're gonna bond over coffee and weird, disturbing stuff from around the world. So sit back, relax. There's gonna be so much more to talk about coming up. I don't know where you're listening to this podcast from, but wherever you're listening from, do me a favor. Hit that rate button, give it a rating, and throw a little review my way. Anything helps. Spread the word, and hopefully we can get some new inductees into the cult. Just before I leave you, I'm just really proud to announce that I got my credit score back recently, and after having my identity stolen many, many times, my credit score is finally back up to 666. And I'm considering trying to keep it there for the rest of my life. I'm not sure how much debt I have to go into and then pay off of to keep my credit score 666, but I gotta say, this is probably the most irresponsible thought I've ever had in my entire life. So that's it for me today. I hope you guys enjoyed the podcast. I hope you learned something. Maybe you learned something. I don't know. Do you guys learn anything? Is this educational, or is this just disturbing? Sometimes it's hard to tell the difference. I know. Thanks for listening, everyone. I hope you enjoyed the podcast. I hope to see you in the next one. Good night.